All right, thank you. All right, well, this is Untangling Dynamic SQL. I'm Mark Wilkinson. I am a father of four, live in North Carolina in the United States. I live in a small town. I say it's a small town. It's a town of about 40,000 people, but it's a town called Garner, just outside of the capital, Raleigh. As Ben had said, I am one of the co-organizers of 8KB, as well as one of the co-hosts of the Mixed Extents podcast, and I am currently an engineering manager at Channel Advisor. So, being a manager, I apologize if my technical skills are a little rusty. But on to the topic, Dynamic SQL. So, Dynamic SQL can be kind of difficult to write. How many single quotes am I using here? How do I concatenate this value into that one? There's also I think I've seen some weird things around data types, but it can be difficult to write. Since it's difficult to write, it can be really difficult to maintain, especially if you have to try to maintain someone's really clever code. And it can also promote something that, and I don't know if this is a Channel Advisor term, but we use it there, called ladder stacking. I guess you could call it technical debt, but ladder stacking is when you don't understand a piece of code. So you just add your own code on top of it and try to make it work. And you end up with this big mess of highly stacked code, and nobody can maintain it. So they just keep adding their own piece to it without attempting to refactor anything. So why did I start using this thing I'm about to tell you about? We manage about 600 plus instances if you count all of our development and production instances. We use a ton of different features, lots of automation. We also have a really old code base. Some of our stored procedures are 20 plus years old and still running in production. Because of that large legacy code base, there's a lot of strange things that we often have to do. The one thing that comes to mind specifically for Dynamic SQL is procedure signing. We use that all over the place. And our procedure signing process is fairly complicated. You've got to loop through databases, loop through procedures, loop through a list of certificates. We don't have enough time to talk about exactly what procedure signing is, but it allows you to use Dynamic SQL in a semi-secure way, but still force your application to use stored procedures. So that's one of the reasons we had to use that. But a easy to read formatting for Dynamic SQL really helps in super complicated automation and maintenance tasks like that. So here is a quick example of something simple. This is probably something that all of you have seen before. It's a simple select statement. It's got a where clause that has a few conditional where conditions there. So we've got some values concatenated in there. We've got like a get date there. And then at the bottom, we are adding some where conditions to this query. So if the product ID variable has something in it, it'll include that and product ID equals whatever the value is. Same for the quantity. So only if those variables have something in them will it actually generate that part of the where clause. So this isn't obviously something. This isn't something I pulled from production or anything, but this is kind of representative of the kind of queries that that we might see. The char 13 that you see there, that just adds like a new line character. I'm a huge stickler for formatting. I hate when queries are all just on one big line. So even if I'm using Dynamic SQL, I like to break my query out onto multiple lines and make it nice and formatted so that in the future, if I'm running like a who is active, or I'm running extended events capture or something like that, the queries that are coming through still look like queries, and I don't have to paste them somewhere else to format them. So while the char 13 is not required by any means, I do see it quite a bit because pretty much everybody I work with is also a stickler for formatting. But this is not the easiest thing to read. You can go through it line by line and kind of figure out what it's doing, but not the best. So we're going to apply some formatting rules. So in some of the rules here, no more blob of concatenated text. We're trying to move away from that. Something a little more maintainable, a little easier to read. What we're going to replace that with is a single block of nicely formatted T-SQL code with placeholders in it. I don't know if anybody has used any sort of templating languages before, but Well, actually, I guess SQL kind of does this too. If you use the SQL command, where you can put little placeholders in your queries and insert values in there. It's the same kind of concept here. So throughout our T-SQL, we're going to use these placeholders wherever we need to put a dynamic value in. So any place where we're selecting a value out of a table and trying to insert it into our Dynamic SQL, we're going to use that brace and then the field name of the table that it's coming from. Brace to close it off. And then anywhere where we're going to be directly inserting a variable into our Dynamic SQL, we'll use the brace at and then the variable name. These are just conventions that I use to make it a little more clear when I'm looking at it, where these values are coming from. And then also to solve the weird single quote issue that I had mentioned earlier, when you're writing Dynamic SQL, and you can see it here in this example here, you can see that like on the beginning of that fifth line, I have 4 single quotes, and then later in that line I've got 3 single quotes. You have to do that so that the single quotes are actually included in the statement that's produced. And that can be hard to keep track of how many quotes you need to put in. I always forget, and I typically end up with a few syntax errors as I'm going along. So what we do instead is we replace that with double quotes. And then later on, we just run a replace, and we remove those double quotes and replace them with single quotes. And this will all make sense when we get to the next slide here. And then whenever I'm doing any sort of Dynamic SQL where I've got multiple optional where conditions, I always start my where clause with 1 = 1, because SQL doesn't really care about that. It's going to throw it out anyways, but then you don't have to worry about dynamically adding the and the or and all that as you add more where conditions. So let's see what our query from before looks like after we apply these rules. So this is the same query. It is a few more lines, obviously, but so much easier to read. So at the top, you've got a bunch of replaces, and then you've got a separator line, and then your actual query, another separator, and then what those replaces are doing. So if you could look at that line where the date is at the end of the select list, we've got those double quotes there. At the bottom of this whole query, we replace those double quotes with 2 single quotes. And then, as before, we've got those where conditions listed at the bottom, and we're just replacing those with those strings that are being calculated. But the thing I really like about this is that it's super easy to read. You can format your T-SQL just like you normally do. And that makes it look nice in captures. And also, if I come across code like this, I know how to maintain that. I have a good idea of how to change that query. Whereas with something like this, it's going to take me a little bit of time to kind of figure out, what was happening here and what I need to alter. So I've got another example that's a little bit more contrived. I say that because I wrote it before I knew about SMO. But I had this great idea at one point of creating my own system where I could create jobs on a single server and distribute them to any number of servers. Some of you may know that is already a feature called the multi-server administration, or MSX TSX. It's really good if you have a big environment and need to get jobs out to a ton of servers. But I didn't really like that system a whole lot, so I was going to try to write my own. So I ended up writing a bunch of Dynamic SQL to do things like generate jobs, generate schedules, and all of the the pieces that are involved in a job. So here's an example of generating agent schedules from an existing set of schedules. Again, it's so easy to just look at this and kind of you can see exactly what each of the parameters is being populated with, and it's just super easy to interact with. Like I said, it's not super useful now because I know about SMO, but at the time it was super helpful. So some applications of this. This format is really great for PowerShell because you can take that T-SQL code with those little, those placeholders in it, and you can pull it right out, put it into a PowerShell script, and run replaces in there just like you would in T-SQL. Works well for maintenance scripts, especially if you're inside of a cursor looping through some stuff. And also helpful if you need to loop through like a set of databases and insert the database name directly into the query. Right. And I am at time. So thanks for attending. This is where you applaud my fantastic job.